first Author's Corner in this newly renovated special space. Yay! And it's just going to get better and better. And tonight we have Paul Clerici here. He's the author of all of these books, which are available for sale. You can pay cash or checks. And he's going to talk about a lot of things, all of this. And we've got the technology going, and we're all cooking. So,
Not gonna put everything.
yeah, we don't have any tech support. Is there anybody in here who's good in tech? No, we're on our own, but we're good, I think, don't you? So, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Paul Clerici. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being here.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it, thank you. Yes, I'm Paul Clerici. Thank you for breaking in this wonderful, beautiful place. I spoke at Melrose maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago. Coach Squires was around. I lived on Temple Street. I'll dig into that more as well. I'm from Walpole, not too far away, near the Foxborough Stadium, past play. I've run Boston 23 times myself, from 1990 to 2012. I've been covering it for almost 40 years now, writing for newspapers, magazines, several books, including the biography on Coach Squires. So I'll dip into a lot of history along the way. If you have any questions, just raise your hand while I'm talking, that way you won't forget towards the end. Like I say, it's almost 130 years of history, so I'm sure I may not bring up something that you want to hear about. So half of this will be about the Boston history, half will be about Coach Squires, and there's a good overlap, obviously, that I'll get into that you'll see why. For those of you who may know Coach Squires, I'll get into a little bit more. The actual Boston Marathon itself is really rooted its great history. Way back in 1896, first modern Olympic Games in Greece. The BAA, the Boston Athletic Association, which organizes the Boston Marathon. Some of their members were part of the U.S. team that represented the U.S. in the Olympics, and they did really well at the Games in 1896. And one of the events that they really liked was this new event called the marathon. It was about 24.5 miles. Actually, it was the second ever marathon if you ignore Philippides in 490 BC, which mixes myth and history. There were soldiers who ran hundreds of miles, basically ultras back then, delivering messages before cell phones. And Philippides' last leg was about 25.5 miles, so that's how they wanted to recognize that for the 1896 Olympics, was to honor that, which you can run it when it grew to 26.2 miles now in Greece. So part of that was the BAA land, because they had their own games here in Boston. They were only a few years old at the time, so they had their BAA games, which is a multi-event game. It's an Irvington Street track, which is kind of where Coffee Plaza Hotel is. The track's no longer there. But the first marathon was actually in April 1896 in Greece. It served basically to qualify for the Olympics. Second marathon was the first modern Olympic Games in 1896. The third ever marathon went from Connecticut to New York in that fall, only lasted 1 year. And we're the fourth one, 1897 of April, 1 year after the Olympic Games. So we're continued the longest, so the great lineage in history. So to have the race finish at the track near the Boston Public Library area, they just had to measure 24.5 miles, which they did here at Ashland. They used the train, which is a commuter rail, to get from Boston to Ashland here. This is Ashland, Pleasant Street in Ashland, Massachusetts. The Sudbury River right here. Metcalfe's Mill, which made shoeboxes, that's no longer there, burned down in the 30s. But that's what they did. That way they could get all the spectators, the officials, the few runners. There's only 18 men signed up, 15 started, and 10 finished. I don't know where the other 5 went. They just kept drifting. Maybe they're still running. But they got lost. It's Boston. So this mural is in Ashland right now. They call it Marathon Park that you can actually visit. It's only about a mile from the current star. This is a more current photo of the original star. There's the Sudbury River in the top left. Metcalfe's Mill was right here that burned down. So they call it Marathon Park, and they have these informational plaques, because the first 27 years of Boston was in Ashland. There's 3 different spots I'll show you. So you can visit it. It's really neat. For decades, they didn't really do much with it. It was like a sign. That was about it. Nailed on a tree. But the past several years, they really spruced it up nicely. I think they're aiming for a little museum on the side, right outside the photo, that you'll see on the edge of the photo near Marathon Park. And you can walk around it. They made nice areas to walk around, benches, a couple of monuments there. So the first 2 years, it was right there on Pleasant Street, 1897, 1898, and it finished at that track. Then the BEA built their clubhouse on Exeter Street, which is no longer there. So those black and white photos of Johnny the Elder Kelly, Casey Yamada, that you saw, the Lennox, if you look at the black and white photo, the Lennox is on the left, the BEA clubhouse is right on the right, that's Exeter Street, all of those photos. So to have it finished there, they had to kind of adjust the start. So the top left corner, which I can't reach, there's a bridge that goes over the tracks. It's still there. It's a commuter rail, like I said. So the next several years, the start was there on that little bridge. If you stand at the end of the Sudbury River, you can actually see it. That was there for like 6 or 7 years, and then there was like 30 or 40 runners, like, oh my God, the bridge can't handle it. So they had to move for a third time to Route 135, which is actually the current 4-kilometer mark. So runners who ran Monday, and more recently, basically run over the last of the 3 spots in Ashland at the 4-kilometer mark on 135 near the State Park, Senior Center area. If you know the area at all, it used to be a big farm area, farmland. So it was there, it's the last of the 3 spots. And then the 1908 Olympics in London, the royal family actually wanted to see the marathon start in front of Windsor Castle, and they wanted to see it finish in front of the Royal Blocks at White Stadium. In order for that to happen, they had to extend the marathon. And it just happened to be 26.2 miles. However, we cursed them. Thank God Windsor Castle wasn't 5 miles away from the stadium. They'd all be ultras. So that's why it's 26.2 miles, just because they wanted to see it. Frank Short always jokes, our great American Olympian who won gold in 72 in the Olympics, and silver in 76. He goes, whenever I get to 24 miles of marathon, I curse the Royals. I'd be done now. I got 2 more miles just because you wanted to see it. So once 26.2 became the universal distance for a marathon, Boston just basically stood on Route 135 and just walked up until it reached 26.2, which happened to be Hopkinton. If Ashland was bigger, which they tell me it was at one point, it'd still be in Ashland. But now it's in Hopkinton where you see it from that point on. 1924 was the first Olympic, the first Boston there. This is Hopkinton Center, right the town common area. The gentleman in the bottom left corner is actually Frank Shorter. The year I took this photo, 2005 or 6-ish, he was working for one of the TV stations, I think Channel 4 or 5, and he was mic'd up, so he'd give reports as he was running. So he's just resting there. I got to know him over the years. I showed him this photo. It was neat. One of the Falmouth Expos. He was next to Catherine DeRay, Bill Rogers, and I think Paul Clerici. And I showed him this photo, and I said, hey, everyone's ignoring you. So, first of all, when I took this photo, I wanted to yell at everybody, Frank Shorter, but I didn't want to impose, because no one, there's our Hall of Fame guy right there. So he's looking at the picture going, hey, look, I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to do. Morning of the race, lie back, keep your legs up. And we're all looking at him like, you're Frank Shorter, of course. We don't always do what we're supposed to do. So he goes, here's proof, I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to do. And behind, there's a lot of monuments around here that I get into in the book. I'll just do a couple here. Behind the bandstand, there's 2 sidewalks that cross, and where it crosses is a sign that says Johnny Kelly Crossing for Johnny the Elder Kelly, who won Boston twice. Across the street is a Korean church, and on the front lawn is a monument recognizing the great Koreans of the 50s. Set a world record in Boston. They won a really good period of time there. On Ash Street, you'll see a little bit of it later. Down the block and in front of the old school is the Team White statue of Rick and Dick White, the father-son duo. They would push his son Rick. Beautiful statue right down the edge down there. And interestingly, those white houses, that's Hayden Row Street. There's 2 streets that sort of bisect. They go down to the Athletes Village at the high school. The runners come up Church Street. In Hayden Row, where those white houses are from 1965 to 85, that's where it started, on the side street. So you'd run, gun goes off at noon, you'd run really fast for about 100 yards and take a quick turn onto Main Street, which had to be running. Now, as you see, we all start on Main Street and just run straight ahead. But the actual village right here, you didn't really need this for a while. For decades, there were either just dozens or hundreds of runners. Wasn't that big. Weren't there many marathons? There's only a few. Yonkers, Culver City, Boston. Weren't there many road races? So you could go up to Hopkinton High School that morning, get your number and run. But then it started to grow. The first year I ran in 1990, there were about 9,000, which is still small, but it kind of grew incrementally. The field didn't reach 1,000 until 1968, 69. So for decades, it was just a small, manageable race. But for the 100th in 1996, the centennial, the BAA realized a lot more people were going to want to run this event. And there was sort of, I used tolerable bandits, the unofficial runners who they would wait till the official runners went and they would join in. They didn't have big numbers. When you're managing a race, that can be dangerous for a number of reasons. Medically, if it's unofficial runner passes out, you know nothing about them. Whereas an official runner has some medical history with a bib number, you don't want to give someone something they shouldn't have. But also how many water cups, medical supplies, anything along the course. So if there were just a few, I don't want to say a few, but a very low number of bandits, and maybe you could handle it. For the 100th, they were thinking there's going to be thousands of bandits. So they increased the field to 38,000 for 1996, the centennial. The prior years leading up to that was only maybe 8, 9, 10,000, so it's a huge jump. And they basically said it's not going to be the first 100 finishers, it's just enjoy the event. It's going to be a fun event. Don't try to get your PRs, 38,000 runners, a lot. So to accommodate it, when they created the Athletes Village, they had to put them somewhere. You can't just show 38,000 people showing up to high school that morning to get your number. So a few things that they did start for the 100th, they still do now. The expo's 3 days long, which wasn't always that way, but for the 100th, they needed that 3 days. So there are a few things that they did start out, and one of them was the village behind the high school and the middle school, so which they still do now. It's about 7/10 of a mile from here to Main Street. If you watch on TV, you'll see a lot of probably those boom cameras kind of showing a huge field, a lot of people. And for those of us who kind of remember 1996, it being New England, a couple of days before the marathon, it snowed. So the village was covered with snow 2 days before the 100th marathon. So to solve that, Dave McGill, the race director, he had a smart idea. He had a couple of Army helicopters hover about 100 feet, just drying the snow, which it worked. It was pretty good. I hope he told the neighbors. Like I said, I live in Walpole, between the Norwood, Mansfield airports, and Army helicopters go a lot, but they're like 1,000 feet up, and the windows still rattle. So you can imagine 100 feet, 10 stories and stuff. But it worked, and they put sawdust and some straw, so the grass wasn't too bad. I mean, it's a little soggy and wet, but could have been much worse with the snow. In addition to having run Boston 23 times myself, I've run 20 other marathons in different states and countries. And I got to tell you, not just because local race, Boston has some neat things that's just so personal, Boston related. Other marathons don't do. One is with the start line. Jack LeDuc, a local Hopkinton, Ashland area, for years would paint the starting line. It used to be just like a white line, very small, like most races. But then over the years, he formed into doing something really neat like this. It grew to about 106 inches wide. He kind of ran out of paint. I gotta bring this back here. But he'd do multicolors, 3D imaging. He'd always put something neat that he wouldn't tell anyone. Like I said, for years, it started at noon. They'd go and go off, everyone would go. Wheelchair athletes about 5 minutes before. When we first had wave starts are kind of like when, I'll simplify, like 1,000 runners every minute in a wave, kind of spreads it out along the course and everything. Pulse starts, depends on different wording. First year with wave starts, he painted blue waves at the starting line. This right here, if you can see, a little faded, is an outline of a heart with an EKG, and it says DM47. Well, Dave McGill, the race director, runs this race every year after everyone else. A couple of times he's run it during it. A couple of years ago he ran with his daughter. One of the years he had triple bypass the year in between the marathons. And he still ran the following marathon, which was his 47th. So unbeknownst to Dave, Jack LeDuc put a heart with a little EKG flag. So Dave McGill looks at it and is like, is that my EKG? Is that good? Can I run with that? Is it real? So it's still faded, you can see. So he would put little things on the starting line, which I thought was cool. And he did the finish line once in a while too. Jack did, so it's kind of neat. I don't see anything like that so artfully and colorfully in other areas, other marathons. Something Boston does. This I just love because it's just massive humanity. I mean, I took this one of the years I ran. If you watch it now, there's space between the corral and the curb on each side, and you wonder why can't we just fill the whole road? Well, we did. But Murphy's Law combined with New England roads, a bottleneck would occur at the starting line. So again, I'd be down here, the government would go off at noon, and you're not moving. Yeah, just for like 4, 5, 6, 8 minutes. Just because that's just how the streets are. So what David did is he measured, to resolve that, he measured different points. And the widest point is around here at 89 feet, and the most narrow is 35 feet in the start. So what he did is he measured 25 feet, put fencing from the start all the way down to the base of the hill, is what you see now, like a uniform 25 feet width. And it was one of the years I ran, he did that, and I remember telling him, I said, well, you're going to be squeezing us in now, you're going to be pushing us farther away, it's not going to take longer. He goes, just run it, talk to me later. All right. Sure enough, the gun went off, because it was the uniform 25 feet, we just flew. It was, even though I was farther back, he just took right off, so I told him afterwards. I said, hey, it worked, Dave. He goes, if you know Dave, he's great, because he's a real good runner and manager, and you mix that together, it's good to solve problems with things like this. A non-runner may not get. So that worked. I'm glad he did something like that. There are many monuments and statues that I show in the books. I'll just do a couple here, like I mentioned. This is at 1 mile mark in Hopkinton at Western Nurseries, which grows trees and shrubberies and things. And the Spirit of the Marathon statue right here has two figures on the top. And there's an identical one like this in Greece. Nico Coffin from Tewksbury created this. The gentleman on the left is Stylianos Kyriakidis, the Greek who won Boston in 1946. He became friends with Johnny Kelly in 1936 Berlin Olympics, ran Boston, didn't do well, came back in 46 right after the war, and he won. And he used that platform of winning, kind of like our first charity winner. Like I said, Greece in 1946 was like most countries in Europe were just decimated after the war. So he used that platform of winning to kind of went around the country here, and he ended up bringing like supplies and I think it was almost $250,000 in addition to supplies. I don't know what $250,000 in 1946 money is now. It had to be a lot of money. And supplies just to help Greece out. And there's another connection between Boston and Greece, and he was a national hero, as he should be in his country, in Greece. So his son, Dimitri Kyriakidis, when the Olympics returned to Greece in 2004, thought it'd be great to have a statue honoring him, not just because it's his father, but because of what he did. This is a long story of how it got created, but one mayor, the original marathon group is where Dimitri wanted to put it. So one mayor said, okay, then the new mayor came in and said no. Then he went to another part of the course, and the mayor said, okay, but we want also a statue of Spiridon Louis, the Greek who won the original 1896 Olympic marathon. Well, it's not a painting where you just kind of paint another guy, it's a statue. But Mako Coffin figured it out, so he created another figure, a Spiridon Louis, and sort of just like stuck it to Stylianos. But if you look at this, the Spirit of the Marathon name came from the fact that Kyriakidis right here is running on the ground of Greece. That's the base of the statue. Near him, Spiridon Louis, if you look, his feet aren't touching the ground 50 years before. So he won 1896 Olympics, 50 years later, Kyriakidis won 1946 Boston, running alongside the Spirit of Spiridon Louis. So it's a nice real connection how we solved it. And like I said, it's identical one in Greece along the marathon route. Beautiful statues, so much great detail. I won't take you through the whole course because I'll talk about Coach Squires, but with Framingham, the tracks run to the runner's left for most of the race, like I showed you to bring everybody in 1897. It's the commuter rail. And part of it also cuts across here where the set lights is, so the tracks go straight ahead and they cut across. It's not too bad because it's flat, the tracks, but if it's wet, it can be kind of slippery. Wheelchairs can go over pretty well because it doesn't bump up. But in 1908, funny enough, well, maybe not funny then, the leaders, like 5 to 6 runners, were approaching this area, and they kind of heard the train wasn't really slowing down, it was getting louder. So they kind of ran a little faster, they ran over the tracks, they turned around, and sure enough, the train cut right in front of everybody else. So the 6 runners kept going, they turned around, they go, everyone else had to wait for the freight train to go by. So obviously the winner came out of that front 6. That hasn't happened since. Once in a while I ask Dave McGilvery if he has a train schedule. He goes, shut up, it's not going to happen. Because it is a commuter, it's a live track, just not steady. But I always think of it when I run by them, just for fun. I do love both ways. We're New England, we're Boston drivers, I like both ways walking on one-way street, right? That's what we do, so I still do it both ways. Wellesley's about a halfway point. Wellesley College is 13.1 miles, is Wellesley Center. Mungar Hall right here, great history with what's called the Screen Tunnel. It gets that name from the college women on both sides of the runners, and they just yell for hours. It's awesome. It just fills your chest. It's a good boost halfway. halfway through. They gave me this photo, probably from the 70s, maybe early 80s, based on what they're wearing. No fencing, they come right up, which is just amazing. In 1996, for the Centennial, with 38,000 runners, nothing against them, but the BEA needed all the road they could get. So they started putting fencing on this side. The tracks are on this side. So they put fencing here, so now the women since then are only on one side, the campus side. But from 1990 to 95 that I ran, they were on both sides, which was just deafening. You hear them before you see it. There's a bend on 135, if you're familiar with the area at all. And you just hear this low din. And every once in a while, when I'm running, probably each of the 23 years, someone next to me, who I don't know, just running alongside, would say that noise, is that train coming? And I'm like, well, it could be, but it could be like 500-600 women up there cheering you on. Oh, okay, what? And if it's a guy, we're like, really? Okay. Stay your pace. Do what the women, the female runners are smarter. They stay with the pace, they enjoy it, they do their high fives, they love it. Guys, we're not that smart. We run really fast. You know, hey, how's it going? Kisses and hugs, and you know, then after you get through college, you're like, ooh, that's a pretty fast quarter mile. I should have done that. So we're not that smart. But they're amazing. And it started from the beginning. In 1897, there was a Harvard runner, and the women came out to cheer him on. And they only missed 1 year when the marathon was on Easter break. As we know, the marathons run on Patriots Day, April 19th. So for decades, whatever day of the week April 19th was the marathon. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Unless it was a Sunday, and they skipped it. Went to Saturday. So it was during the week. The marathon could be on a Wednesday or Thursday. It wasn't until the late 60s it was changed to the third Wednesday in April, which it is now. So one of those earlier times just happened to be their Easter break. And also a neat thing, if you had watched it on TV or had run it or just seen photos, the fencing now that they're all behind on this side, if you see those signs, you know, Go Johnny and this kind of thing, they make that themselves. When social media started, the women of Montgomery Hall, and you know, so it changes every year, every 4 years, graduation and everything, so it's not just one class, it's a tradition that's continued. They send out a message on social media for like a 2 or 3 week span. If you want a message, send it to us, we'll make a sign. So say you live in Australia, and you're Anton, good luck Anton, we're behind you, whatever, you can't make it, they'll make a sign. And it's like a room like this, they gave me some photos to put in. Big room like this, and big poster boards, they look at the messages, okay, painting and stuff, and those signs, they all make, which I think is fascinating. And I can't find that in any other marathon. It's another excellent little personal touch. You don't have to do that. I mean, just having 600 women cheering you is pretty good. So they take it to the next level, and they do it every year. So it's just a new group coming in that does that. So that's another Boston thing. It's really cool. Well, John and Kelly, I mentioned, there's two, younger and elder, unrelated. We call them younger and elder. There's Johnny Kelly out of Connecticut who won Boston in 1957, who's a BAA member. And then unrelated with Johnny the Elder Kelly, who won Boston in 1935 and 1945 from Arlington, lived in Dennis on the Cape for decades. They dedicated a statue called Young at Heart because he'd always sing that Frank Sinatra song, and the lyric, he only lived 102, and he got close, 97 years old. He died in 2004. So they dedicated the statue marathon weekend, 92, 93-ish. This is Commonwealth Avenue right here. It's 19.1 miles. Newton City Hall is like right about here, if you know the areas, give you an idea. So this is Commonwealth Avenue, part of the course. There's Walnut Street that cuts right across. So they dedicated about a block up here, originally, really neat. Well, I don't know, 6 or 7 months later, a car hit the statue and broke its arm. Boston drivers, right? You know, what are you doing on the sidewalk? So they fix the arm, and they go, well, let's not put it back here. We're going to have parts in the garage to fix. You know, let's put it here. So it's on this side now, and it's facing the direction of the runner. It used to be facing the runner, now it's facing the direction. And it's like 80 feet in. I wish it was a little closer to the road so you could see it. When you run the marathon, you really got to kind of remember where it is to look over. But it's a great meeting place. I mean, everyone trains. This is College Road. That College Road is right here that parallels basically the entire Newton Hills. And on any given weekend during training, if you ever drive by, it looks like a road race. There's hundreds of runners training. Because you can just parallel the course without getting into traffic. You run up here. So it's a great meeting place. People will meet there for your training, or your friends or something, a good gathering place. And about a mile up is Heartbreak Hill. which is named because of Johnny. He won in 1935, so 1936 he was favored, he's a local, everyone wanted him to win, we love him here. So around this area he was behind Ellison Brown out of Rhode Island, one of the great marathoners who won Boston. And he gradually caught up to Ellison at about 20 and a half and sort of tapped him on the back, kind of like, it's my race now, I got it, which woke up Ellison, who just like took off and ended up winning, and Johnny faded to fifth. And Jerry Nason, the sports editor of the Globe, who's covering all these races, said that move broke Johnny's heart and morphed into Heartbreak Hill around 20 and a half, right before Boston College. Johnny came in second 7 times in Boston. And just talking to him over the years, he said, half of those I could have won, especially that. Because I was this young, cocky kid. He goes, you don't do that. Every coach will tell you, when you catch someone, you keep going. You don't antagonize them. You don't wake them up. Because in the marathon, you can get into like a groove, you know, good or bad. You can get into a funk that can just affect you. You can get into this great smooth groove that just miles go by effortlessly. And in that case, he woke up one of the greatest marathons. So he learned from that, because he won in 1945, John did. 1 mile to go at Kenmore Square. I took this in 1996, so it's a little different. On the left is the bus station, which I think has an overhang now. We've kind of redid that. And Ron McDonald's not there. He made sure we were safe. But I tell Ron, unless your leg's broken or something, you're going to make it with a mile to go. I mean, the spectators just carry you in. It's just unbelievable. I mean, 1 mile, right, there's your, you know, like the old thumbtack on Google or whatever it is, where you're supposed to be. Well, this is your finish. Right? You can't get, you know, monsters right there. And you go straight ahead underneath this little overhang, overpass here, and the old, you take a right on Hereford Street, left on Boylston, saying that every marathoner loves. And when you take a left on Boylston, this is your view. Hereford Street is right on your edge. Finish line is right here. Heinz Convention Center, you can know where you are. The expo, where you get your number. For that, to bookend the earlier photo from 1965 to 85, where the race started on Hayden Row Street, that side street, for those years, it's finished on Boylston. All those Bill Rogers wins, Bob Hall wheelchair champion, Joe Benoit Samuelson, all those great wins that we had were on Ring Road. There is a ring road that cuts here and goes to the western, but at the time there was a side ring road that was parallel to Boylston. So you take a left onto Boylston Street back then, and after about a block, you'd veer off of Boylston, and you'd go right into this little section that would have, it's right in front of the Prudential statue. And you'd finish there for those 21 years until it moved here when John Hancock took over in 1986. One of the things that the BAA was requested to do is if you could move the finish line from in front of Prudential Insurance, move it to in front of John Hancock Tower, and like, okay, we'll do that. Here it is. So it's a shot of the John Hancock Tower in front of the bleachers here and the Boston Public Library. And Bank of America just took over the sponsorship last year. It was their second year. John Hancock was, for decades, it was amazing, almost 40 years, which is unheard of in the business world. Amazing what they did. And I was joking with the BAA officials who I know. I said, in '86, we moved the finish line close to the John Hancock Tower. Now with Bank of America, they got a branch 2, 3 blocks down. You gonna move it again? But, no, shut up, it's staying right there. I'm like, because there is actually a Bank of America branch about 2 blocks down. So they don't do it anymore. But those original, like I mentioned, to segue into Coach Squires and those guys, this is their ring road from 1965 to 85 that you finish. So Boylston Street was right here, and you veer off onto Ring Road and finish here in front of the Prudential statue which is right up to it. Now this is all cement, walkway and everything. So the reason I want to segue here is that between 1965 and 85, all the American winners in the 70s and the 80s of the Boston Marathon came out of the Greater Boston Track Club. And the original coach of the Greater Boston Track Club was Bill Squires, who lived in Melrose for a number of years on Temple. And that's Bill Rogers, Alberto Salazar, Greg Meyer, Bob Hall, wheelchair champion, all members of the Greater Boston Track Club that started in 1973 at Boston College. Good segue. Jack McDonald created at BC, which is right along the course, for collegiate members who just want to continue their training. And with the Greater Boston Track Club, one of the first guys they wanted to think of was Bill Squires. And Bill Squires came out of Arlington, Mass. Excellent runner. Went to in Arlington High School, set records, mile records, state championships. He knew what he was doing as a runner, obviously. And then he went to Notre Dame. And when he ran Notre Dame cross country and track, he set 20 records in Notre Dame. He broke one of Greg Rice's 30-something-year-old, 20-something-year-old record. He ran 4 to 5 events per track meet at Notre Dame, which is unheard of, to get points for the team. Amazingly, I mean, he looks so fit here, which is just awesome. He was actually born with a malformed heart. One of his valves was like the size of a pinhole. That's heart valves. And when he was young, they didn't expect him to live out of his adolescence. He was a year late in school. He was just homeschooled for a while just because the doctors didn't know. You know, he was born in 1932. They didn't know much about that until one time the doctor said, no, he has to build up his heart. You know, and heart's a muscle. And while running. And he said once I got permission, because I just ran, played hockey, played everything I could, did all his athletics. So when he became so good, when he did run those 4 or 5 events, he would just taste blood. Because he'd be pushing himself so hard at Division I level, you know, 3 out of your 4 valves and pumping blood, you know, it's a lot, he's pushing hard for that. He's still smiling. But setting 20 records at Notre Dame in Division I, unbelievable. And then as a coach, he learned, he was coached at Notre Dame by Alex Wilson, a Canadian Olympic medalist, who did good things and bad things. One is bad thing was running 4 or 5 events a meet. He could never really shine, really break 4-minute miles. He got close, 4:06 was his closest. So as a runner, he kind of knew what worked, what didn't work. He could always tell once he became a coach, an athlete who he coached who kind of may become a coach. Some athletes, you tell them what to do, they'll do it excellent. Some athletes, you tell them what to do, they know this is part one of something you're going to build on. They see an overall picture. Those are more inclined to be a coach. Not every great athlete can be a coach. Not every great athlete who is naturally great can just convey everything to someone else as a coach level. But Bill Squires went to Boston State College, became UMass Boston, for those of us of a certain age. And he excelled there as well, won state championships at Boston State College. So when Greater Boston Track Club started, you know, he was a great choice because his talent was known. This is him in the early 70s. The U.S. State Department sent him to other countries to coach athletes and other coaches, just India, where he's coaching the next level of Olympians coming out of India in the mid-70s. So not just in the U.S. where he would coach club athletes, school athletes, individual athletes. He went to different countries too because he really knew how to coach. And especially with different countries, another photo from India, to show them how to do different track and field, long distance things. So he knew what he was doing, which was as a runner and as a coach. And then he became, in 1980, you know, going ahead a little bit, before the games were boycotted, he was the Olympic coach for the 10K and the marathon. But then obviously the boycott didn't have a game, but he was the Olympic coach for that. So for Greater Boston Track Club, it was just like a natural fit for him to coach all these guys. In the Elliott Lounge, that I had alluded to a little, talking to somebody about earlier, was in the Elliott Hotel as a runner's lounge. Is kind of giving it too much class. I say that lovingly. It was a runner's bar. You walk in, this was the Elliott Hotel near the Harvard Club on Mass Ave. This door faces Massachusetts Avenue, if you know the area at all. The marathon goes under Mass Ave now. This is at the corner, or was at the corner. It's not the lounge, and the building's still there, but the lounge was closed in 1996. It's something different now. But it had runners' photos on the wall. It had the long jump record painted on the floor. The high jump record was painted on the wall. Tommy Leonard, late great Tommy Leonard, who created the Falmouth Road Race and some other races, loved running, had run Boston Marathon. He was the manager, bartender, he said, I wasn't that good. At the LA Lounge, he knew all the runners. He had all the country's national anthems. He would play them. In 1980, when Ruiz was cheating, Jackie Dewar from Canada actually won, he brought her to the LA Lounge, played the Canadian national anthem, toasting her. I mean, he really knew running. And Bill Squires had coach's corner. There was a seat at the end of the bar that he would dispense all of his training, and he had a phone there, and he would call different athletes that he was coaching to give advice. And this is typical of how we write it down on a napkin, the back of an envelope. And over the years, they said, why don't you just write everything down? He goes, I write it piecemeal, because I don't want to get beat by something that I'm giving one of my athletes. So if I write down on a nice piece of paper the entire training of something, and my athlete loses it or someone else gets it and uses it, they can use that against us. So that's why he always had this piece of paper. And if you ask him about something, he'd grab a cocktail napkin, write something down. Yeah, do this. This will improve your time, or do something. This was indicative of that. Little back of an envelope, piece of paper, barbell, whatever it is. And the Greater Boston Track Club, like I said, started in 1973. Same time as the Falmouth Road Race started in 1973, unrelated, but Running Boom was just starting to get going. Frank Shorter won gold in 72. Title IX, 72, equal federal funding, better women's sports. Bill Rogers was starting to come out, blue collar guy out of Boston. So Running Boom was getting there, and Greater Boston Track Club was part of that. We've got Earl Salazar on the left, who's excelling. Dan Dillon, number 3, Greater Boston guy. Greg Meyer, who would win Boston in 1983. So the Greater Boston Track Club was beating countries. They would have better results than a group from different countries. National championships in cross country, where there's relays in different areas. Then entered Bill Rogers, who we all know from Connecticut, gentleman right here. He was a member of the BAA, the Boston Athletic Association, and he went to Wesleyan in Connecticut. His roommate was Andrew Burford, who won Boston in 1968. Jeff Galloway, another fellow U.S. Olympian, also went there, Wesleyan. So Bill started to see all these running, and he wanted to run differently. So he left the BAA because he started to see the Greater Boston Track Club guys. He started to see Coach Squires, started to see, he reads a lot, Bill Rogers. He knows history, he knows results, he did research every week. So he's seeing the same names, Bob Hodge from Greater Boston Track Club, Randy Thomas, Dick Mahoney, Don Ruscialo, or Jack McDonald. He's just seeing these names, other than the top tiers like Bill Rogers, Earl Salazar out of Wayland, Mass, high school kid, excelling, doing really well. He wants to be a part of that. So he left the BAA and he joined the Greater Boston Track Club. What he brought with him, because the Greater Boston Track Club was basically just relays, track events, didn't do marathons yet. But Bill sort of brought that in, and it coincided with that Running Boom, with greater interest in marathons that they started to see. And 1973, Bill Rogers ran Boston and dropped out. 1974, he came in 14th place. So he's incrementally getting better and better. And then 1975, he wins, which they just honored him, the 2025 Boston Marathon, the Grand Marshal, him and Bob Hall, who was also a Great Boston Track Club guy. So Bill Rogers really excelled with that. Didn't do everything Coach wanted him to do. Back then, there were so many races starting to pop up. Coach Squires had to sort of manage his athletes because they would run races in the weekend and then do his program during the week. He goes, don't do that. And they're like, well, you want me to do like a 10-mile hard training on a Sunday. Well, I found a 10-mile race that I can get a few bucks if I win. Okay, sounds logical, but just don't push yourself. Because I want you good, don't do anything on Monday. I want you to be fresh for Tuesday's workout. Because as any good coach knows, you build on your training. You coach for a specific race. So you do something Tuesday that's going to build on your Thursday, and so on and so on. So as long as everyone's sort of on the same page, it's not ideal that you do a race every weekend. Bill would do a couple. But that's how you earned money back then. They weren't considered professionals back then. They got money under the table. That's what races did. Race directors would want you to come because that brought more attention. It was just on the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union had at the time. So in 1975, Bill Rogers won, and the course record did amazing with a hand-written GBTC t-shirt. In Boston, everyone cheered him on. Jack McDonald, Don Ruscialo, teammates of his, followed him along the course, and they had the radio on, and they overheard one saying, "Oh, there's the gentleman out front, number 14, from the Great Britain Track Club. We'll find out who he is." And he's like yelling at the radio, "It's Bill Rogers. He lives down the road. It's right at Boston. What are you doing, Great Britain?" That's new. He is new at this. But look what he's wearing. Nothing real professional. Other than the Nike running shoes, which I'll get into, this is what he wore. This was the shadow box display in his store at Faneuil Hall, now it's at Nike. The t-shirt he found in some alleyway, his wife at the time had a magic marker and put Boston GBTC, 14, the bib number because he came in 14th the year before. But the blue Nikes actually were given him by the late Steve Prefontaine in Oregon, who was just starting Nike shoes. from Blue Ribbon, Phil Knight did it. About a month before the Boston Marathon, Bill Rogers competed in the World Cross Countries in Rabat, Morocco. It's a tremendous, tremendous feat to do that. And he came in third, bronze medal. Bill Rogers did. It was huge in the running community alone. That's amazing. The cross country is in Europe and the World Cross Countries. It's not just that you remember in high school here in the U.S. You go over barriers, hedgerows. It's phenomenal. The talent level is just skyrocketing. And part of the U.S. team that was with Bill Rogers was Frank Shorter, Jeff Galloway, guys who knew Nike. So on the flight back, Bill asked him, "Can I get a pair of Nikes? It's starting to get a little better. Nike is just starting, in Oregon." So a couple weeks later, less than a week, April 9th, dated on the letter that he had. It's not given display case, but the letter from Steve Prefontaine said, "Hey, Jeff told me, you just got third. It's great. Here's some couple of new Nikes that we have if you want to run it." It's April 9th, the letter. So the marathon was April 21st. So I remember asking Bill, I got to know Bill pretty well over the years, doing a number of stories on him. New England Running Magazine, current issue has a great one. Really expansive. I wrote interviewing a lot of people. And I said, "Bill, isn't there a cardinal rule not to wear new running shoes?" See, April 9th letter, so we probably got a couple of days later. April 21, he goes, "Paul, I'm doing like 400 miles to take a handle." I'm like, all right. Even though you had to tie your shoe a couple of times along the route, so was Steve Prefontaine. And unfortunately, Steve died in May, a few weeks after this, so they never met. But the legend continued with that, so that's what which is kind of funny having a New Balance headband next to a Nike shoe. We'll get into that later. But that's how running was back then. On those running, that's why those were great souls. He didn't run. He ran another race later on with those, which was great. And Bob Hall, the gentleman on the right, they just honored him as well. That's Joan Benoit Simonson, top left, talking to Dave McGilvery. All four of these people got coaching from Bill Squires. Joan Benoit, as far as I can recall, is not a Greater Boston Track Club member, but Coach Squires also coached other people outside of Greater Boston Track Club. Dave McGilvery was a Greater Boston Track Club guy. Coached him, and obviously Bill and Bob Hall. Bob Hall was an excellent mile champion in wheelchair, and he was a student at Boston State College with Coach Squires. And Greater Boston Track Club member, he said, "Coach, I want to do Boston." It's 1974-ish. And Coach Squires is like, "All right, I'll give you training." Because he gave everyone the same training just for their ability. He always made it like 3 different groups of training. Group A, like the Bill Rogers types, even Earl Salazar, the high school kid, could match that, but he wouldn't get the exact same level, but the same training. Group B, Group C. So he knew how to assess talent. So he gave Bob Hall, the only real big difference with Bob Hall's training, obviously, is the wheels on the turns of the track. The gripping's a little different. But as far as the distance and the oxygen intake is basically the same. The intervals, you still have to propel real fast. So while he was training, he talked to Will Cloney, the race director, and it wasn't known in wheelchair. In 1970, there was somebody who took 7 or 8 hours doing something before the Boston Marathon just to do it, but competitively there was nothing. So Will Cloney was talking to Coach, and I'm simplifying it, basically said, "Okay, can you vouch? Do you think you can do it?" And Coach goes, "Yeah, I'm coaching him." And Coach was a member of the BAA, actually. Will goes, "All right, if you can do it under 3 hours, we'll make him an official starter, an official finisher, and we'll get a certificate. He'll be an official entrant." So he did that, and great training. There was some times that Bob Hall was training Coach Squires in the summer in the car, behind him with the hazards on in the snow, because March in New England, right, that's when you train. He's going up and down the hills, and they'd stop every once in a while, and Coach's son would get out of the car and wipe off his glasses, his gloves, get back in the car. At one point, Bob Hall told me, because he's looking down, obviously, with the wheels, and he gets to an intersection, I think near Center Street, Newton, BC area, and there's a lot of traffic, and the traffic stopped. He looked up, and it's Coach in the middle of the intersection, directing traffic to make sure Bob was here safely. And so Bob's like, "Oh, it is Bill, because he's not in the car." And he didn't see him come around because he's so focused on that. And he did. April 21st, 1975, he came in 2 hours and 58 minutes with runners. The runners were passing him. So he probably could have done much faster. And the runners were great. They were like, they would say, someone ahead of them, wheelchair on your left, wheelchair on your right. And he'd go, okay, you get out of the way. Runners were receptive. They didn't care. We're runners. We don't care. Come on, we love everybody. But it was just tough. And I asked Bob, I said, when did you kind of get a pace? He goes, BC, New. That's a long way to not have your pace. It's because he was just engulfed by runners. It was all the runners and him. But he did it in 2:58 minutes, became the first official wheelchair entrant and finisher. And then officially, a few years later, was the official start of wheelchair athletes, but in all divisions. But it started with Bob Hall. There are a few things in life and things like this you can pinpoint to like one person. Bobby Gibb, 1966, first woman to run the Boston Marathon. Things like that, they can really nail it to one person. And all wheelchairs now, it's from Bob Hall. All races, not just Boston. Even Marcel Hube, the Silver Bullet Switzerland, who's just won Boston, he said, because Bob Hall made chairs, his first several years with a chair was those vertical hospital chairs, is what he raced in. And then he started to develop a little more aerodynamic chairs, so he had a company, Bob Hall Chairs. And Marcel Hube, Bob didn't know this, but Marcel Hube, in Switzerland, remember when he was a kid, he wanted a Bob Hall chair. Bob didn't know this. It's just how you touch people along the way like that. And it all started with this man, so I'm glad that they really recognize that. And it came back to Paul Squires, the BAA, just everyone doing that, which is just, it's amazing. Everyone sees this photo a lot, which is a great photo of Coach Squires having on Bill Rogers, which the legalities, we won't discuss having a coach run during a race, but we'll just ignore that part. This is 1980. And people forget that with the boycott, Bill Rogers spoke up against the boycott. Don't boycott the Olympics, it doesn't do anything. Bill Rogers received death threats, and one specifically said, you'll never make it beyond mile 24. So as an act of support, Coach Squires around this area of that death threat went out and ran with him, which a lot of people don't know the background of that, in addition to helping him out, giving some money. There weren't real water stations yet, but that was a kind of little defiance against the death threats that he actually received for speaking out against the boycott. And he won in 1980. The relationship between the two is amazing. This gentleman reading my book is Dick Beardsley. Dick Beardsley out of Minnesota, one of our great marathoners. He holds the record, I think, of his PR, setting a PR in like 12 or 13 consecutive marathons, which is astonishing. In other words, personal record improving each time. It's almost like Byron Nelson with the PGA wins, the succession of that. For the 1982 Boston Marathon, the duel in the sun, the famous duel in the sun between Eberl Salazar and Dick Beardsley. It was interesting if you ever find this on YouTube, because Bill Squires is actually commentating on one of the channels. Which is fascinating on its own, regardless of the races. But he specifically trained Dick Beardsley for the 1982 Boston Marathon. And Alberto Salazar was a great Boston Track Club member, and just the year before went to Nike in Oregon, but he was still using what he had been coached. So both of them were basically running what Coach Squires coached them. That's why, one of the reasons why it was so close. Salazar won by 2 seconds, set a record, but that's why it was so close. Called Duel in the Sun, that they were so close, shoulder to shoulder for most of the time. They're both doing what Coach told them. And if you watch on YouTube, you'll hear Coach saying, okay, all right, Dickie, you're taking this turn, take it, good, you're doing that. All right, Allie, you gonna respond? Yep, he's just like thinking out loud as a coach. All right, Allie, you're supposed to respond. Yeah, he's doing that, good. And it's amazing if you ever get a chance to see the footage. But Dick Beardsley being in Minnesota, so when Coach would coach athletes outside of Boston, he'd be at Coach's Corner where the phone was, at Elliott Lounge, and he would call Dick once in a while and give him what he had to do, and he would do it in Minnesota. Usually sometime in March, elite athletes would come here, train some on the course, whether it's through here or not. And Coach Squires knew the course so well, he was the one who gave the tours for the elite athletes, through John Hancock, through the BAA, whoever was handling it at the time. So he knew the course. So if the elite athletes came, all the Kenyans and different countries from Africa, anywhere, if you want a tour of the course the week leading up to the Boston or whatever, they'd organize it with Bill Squires. So he was telling Dick Beardsley all these things, and once Dick said, I always get excited, because he wrote the forward for this book, as a father-son relationship. He goes, every time I hung up, he was so excited, I want to go run. I go, Coach, stop calling me at night. I don't care about the 3-hour difference, because I just got so pumped up, ready to go. So one time, funny, Dick calls the coach and said, "Coach, I'm in trouble." He goes, "What's wrong?" I went to the doctors, and he said I have an enlarged heart. He goes, he doesn't want me to run. He goes, "Dick, you're supposed to have an enlarged heart. You're an endurance athlete, your VO max, you're pushing the oxygen level more. When you find a doctor who knows about athletes, you're supposed to have an enlarged heart." "Geez, Dickie." And he's like, "Oh, okay, great," because you are. As an endurance athlete, you're pushing harder, so your muscle, your heart muscle gets bigger. For someone who's sedentary who has an enlarged heart, that's different. But as an endurance athlete, like a marathon, ultra marathoner, you do, because you're pushing more, you're pushing more blood out through. And that's why it's very close between he and Earl Salazar. So Coach Squires did that, which is amazing. Coaching all these different people, he could really, like I say, assess talent. This is one of the seminars with Coach Squires. This gentleman here, Greg Meyer, who won in 1983. Tony Brevis, you always hear his voice commentating with the race during on television, sometimes on the radio. He lived in Boston for a while and worked with a lot of these guys, and a great network that he would really promote for running. Bill Rogers, Coach Squires, and Larry Rawson also did a lot of commentating. Actually went to DC as well. So it was a neat little collection of everybody during one of the seminars of Coach Squires. But you can see the friendships that formed with them. Yeah, and then a few years ago I had Coach Squires as the coach, because he ran Boston in 1961. And he came in 20th place. He wanted to be able to run things so when he coached, he could kind of tell his athletes. At the very least, if the athlete said, "I don't want to do this, would you do this?" And he could say, "Oh, I did do that." And he would, shut him down, the athlete. Because sometimes he'd give, like, he'll repeats, like 7 or 8, and athletes go, "That's too many." He goes, "What do you think you could do?" And the coach goes, "I did 10 or 12 of these on a regular basis, shut them down." And it's just, but he was a fun coach too, because he said, running is hard work. It's a tough thing to do. We're not using a ball or a bat. We're not kicking the ball. It's not fun. It's hard. Other sports are hard work as well, but when you run, you're just running. You're going to impress a coach, but it's hard work. You're on your own a lot. So I try to make it fun. I try to joke around and stuff. So he was very. He always said, "The fox that bit me died." He goes, I just would make things fun and joke around. So it's funny enough, when he ran in 1961, when he got to run the BC area, because there was no official water stations, he grabbed a cup, drank it, and it was a 7-7. It had Seagram's in it, for those who know. So like for a mile, I go, "That was good." I go, "Did it help you?" He goes, "I don't know." He goes, "I can feel it." So I had to go over the finish line just once, just for fun. And I'll end with this one, a nice little reflective photo of Coach with the skyline. He passed a couple of years ago, but like I said, he used to live here in Melrose. And if you go down Elm Pond, the Clarence DeMar monument, he put that there. Because Clarence DeMar, who won Boston 7 times, Bill Rogers lived here during a couple of his own wins. So Melrose is very rich, great running club as well. Good road races here too. So his legacy continues with that. Clarence DeMar, he first won 1911, and his 7th win was 1930. That's astonishing. Back then, with like not having the super duper shoes. Because back then they would wear the track shoes, take off the cleats in the bottom, and the track shoes you would see. And if you look at those old photos, zoom in on the shoes, these thin, almost like leather patent dress shoes. But they were track shoes without the cleats, and they were doing all that. And they didn't have all the benefit of gyms, how to eat. Clarence DeMar would eat steak. Bill Rogers famously pizza with mayonnaise on, so I don't know what to eat. They don't go so far, leave the horse in the water, right? But so that's a nice little monument that Coach got put down there. So any questions? I know I went through a little bit with both topics and wanted to overlap a bit. Like I said, it's 130 years of Boston history, and there's enough stories with Coach that I could write a book. So obviously there's more stuff I may not have brought up there. So if you have any questions of anything I didn't bring up, or something I did bring up that you want to ask, yes.
You didn't mention anything about the money that's involved in the marathon today. When did they start paying the runners, and what drove them to do that?
Directly in 1986. Prior to that, other marathons started to pop up in the 70s, Chicago, New York, and they were paying prize money, appearance money, and the BAA stuck to the gun saying, "No, people are going to run Boston just because it's Boston." And that worked for a while. But it's got to the point that it's a job. I mean, it's a job for these elite athletes. They run basically 2 marathons a year. I mean, you can run one every week if you want, but safely one in the spring, one in the fall. So they started to go elsewhere. And then finally when they said, okay, we gotta get some funding, and that's when they went to John Hancock. And once John Hancock started in 1986, that was prize money began. Now it's up to $150,000 for winning. Equal men and women, open division, wheelchair division, top 10. I mean, it's really, really good. It started back then. BA was a little late to that, just because of, been around for so long. It was a little reactionary to that, but it started in '86 when Hancock, which most races you needed a big sponsor to bring in prize money. Everybody needed that. Bank of America is good with Chicago Marathon. They didn't come out of the blue. So they know now through with Boston, they've had experience with Chicago Marathon. So you do need that to start with. So that's how it started in '86. Yeah.
Further on that, how did it expand to the charity runner's role that it is today?
Yeah, it's like hundreds and billions of dollars that they do. Bill Rogers actually started out with Falmouth too. He had like a March of Dimes letter that he would ask the Carrolls and the Shermans, the race directors of Falmouth, can you put this with applications, maybe they'll donate. And it sort of bled into the BAA and the Boston Marathon as well. But like I say, really in 1946 with Kyriakidis, on unorganized ways. I don't want to say unorganized, but not organized way it is now, where the charities are now. But the BAA started with just a few, and it just grew and grew because the need was there. And now certain charities that they pick, now it's up to 100 or so, maybe down that, maybe it's more than that, get a certain number of bib numbers. And with charity numbers, you don't have to qualify. To backtrack a little bit to give it in context, in 1970, qualifications first started for Boston. Prior to 1970, you could just run Boston. Then the VA started to see runners, a lot of runners couldn't finish, or they did it as the old line is wearing a Superman costume, did it as a joke, and they would stop at BC and join their friends. It made it kind of not a mockery, but they didn't like it. So in 1970, they said, let's curtail this a bit. Everyone has to run a marathon, prove you've run a different marathon 4 hours or under to be able to run Boston. Well, what happened was more runners came the following year instead of fewer. And it worked against them. They're like, what the heck? All right, now they reduced it to like 3.5 hours. More runners came, 72, 73. Running boom started. Men and women were allowed to run. Prior to 1972, the AAU, the governing body of all road races, didn't allow women to run marathons that they governed. In 1972, they finally relented and allowed women to run marathons. So it wasn't just Boston or New York where it didn't allow the women, it was the AAU, the governing body. So now women were running. So now books started coming out. Jim Fitz in mid-70s, The Joy of Running, complete book of running, just the benefits of, heroic benefits of running. Everyone started running now. So all the confluence of all these things worked against it. The BAA created this monster of making this a thing to do. Other than the Olympics, Boston's the only one you have to qualify for. So it grew and grew that you had to run. Now it's very, very finite, depending on your age group. You have to, I won't get into details. It can be boring for some people, don't care about it. But it's very finite as to your age group. You have to run a previous marathon. So from that, not everyone can do it. So then charities started coming up saying, it'd be great to look at all the attention that Boston is getting. We could raise money. The BAA goes, yeah, let's do that. Let's start to get some of these charities, like the Dana-Farber, and now it's just not just the top tier charities. It's a lot. It's tons of charities, and they get a certain amount of bid numbers from the BAA. So if you can't qualify, you don't run fast enough, you can go through a charity and raise X amount of money, whatever the charity determines. And there are some fit runners who would normally or just missed out the qualifying, so they're very fit and they would have qualified. And there are runners that would never ever be able to get in the marathon without this, and they're good runners. To me, it's the whole race. Whether you're Med Profleski who won in 2014, the person who came in last, that's the race. One doesn't take away from the other or whatever. So with all the charities in the billions, they just mentioned the total so far, or up to date, like it's like billions of dollars, which is just that's. And other marathons are doing that. I don't know to what scale, but Boston, it's huge. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, Well, I'll be here, again, if you buy it, I can sign it for you. If you think of a question or a story, tell me, I'll be around. I love hearing stories as well. So thank you for coming out, and thank you.